Okay, Bruchim Aboim, we are going to begin. Would like to welcome all the Shluchim who are joining us for this special Zoom conference. This is a special service which is being presented by the Shluchim office in follow-up to the Zoom meeting that we had last week with the doctors, with the experts, infectious disease experts, Dr. Gardner. We announced it last week that we would like to have, in follow-up of this conference, we would like to have another Zoom with Rov, and we are honored that Rabbi Ulman agreed to join us. We all know that the Rebbe spoke in Shabbos Truma, Tovshim Memches, right after the Shiva. The Rebbe spoke about the Ma'ila V'chsidishe Rov. The Rebbe said that the Keach should be V'chsidishe Rabbonim because then they paskin Sai mitzad Nigla the Torah, Sai mitzad Pimis Torah. So we are honored to have a Rov here, was a senior Dayan of the Bezin in Sydney, and b'yachad mizeh he is now became probably the Rov of the Shluchim. The many hundreds and hundreds of Shluchim all over the world are calling him every day on Shilas from in every area. I could say myself that I got to know about Ulman lately because we just did a gear with him a few months ago with a member of the community here, and he's helped us for several years in many Shilas of different issues that very not every Rav was able to answer, and we are very honored to have Rabbi Ulman, who is an expert in many areas, and especially in this area. You just wrote a psak din for the Bezin in Sydney on this subject on what to do to open, how to open, if to open, and so on. So we are very thankful to Rabbi Ulman who took from his time to share us with the Shluchim. And I think Rabbi Ulman will first start with a general presentation on the subject, to make sure everyone understands what it means, what it's all about, the halachic perspective, and then we'll open for questions and answers. And Rabbi Chaim Lazarov will be our moderator. We want to thank him for joining us as well. So Rabbi Ulman, the floor is yours. Yasher koach.
Yasher koach, Rabbi Greenberg, and for all those who organized this event. When Rabbi Greenberg asked me a while ago if I'll speak, I thought I'm going to speak to 5-6 shluchim. That's the way it sounded, and I didn't realize it's going to be a ganze farnem, such a big presentation. And obviously, it's impossible to be able to give justice to this very, very vast question that has so many different sides to it and so many different aspects to it. And therefore, I have a list of questions over here, and even those questions we can answer in a general way. But obviously, question has to be treated separately. And in future, if we, some of these questions, I'm happy to address, answer or try to discuss those questions. If those who asked would like to call privately. I was asked to give a general hakdome to the subject because we know that it's this last weeks, whatever it was, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, was like a very, very emotional time for everybody. It was a world-changing event. And together with, here in Sydney, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did, not because Sydney is exactly the same as everywhere else, every place is different, but just to give an idea of how we approach the concept of closing shuls. But at this particular time, there was a lot of emotional reactions both ways. And some of the questions that we were approached, and people know that also they were publicized, questions such as what happened to the fact that, the wisest of all people said that Shema Mitzvah Li'eda Dovera. How can we start closing shuls and yeshivas? And people ask the question, why do people allow to go to work? Isn't this a chil Hashem that somebody can go to work, but they shouldn't go to shul? What about the fact that, if the danger is so remote, driving a car is also sakana, so they compared the sakana of going to shul now to driving the car, and if you're going to be worried about an accident, then might as well stay home and never go to shul. Then there were questions of, I was asked a question of Bechal of Magefa. In certain places, we know that the Gemara and the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch say that a certain amount of people have to die per 500 or per 1,000 3 or 6, and in a place where you don't have so many people dying, do we say this is a Magefa or not? So first of all, I would like to give a general Hakdama, and it's going to be very, very short, because there's so much you can talk about it. The whole question of Sakona, Pikuach Nefesh, are vast topics that are discussed in many sugyas, in Shas, and Rishonim, and Achronim. But I would like just to say that the general Kav, and we can look at a beautiful, beautiful Sikha from the Rebbe in Chelik Chav Zayin, Achre Meis, Sikha Gimel, where the Rebbe brings a Yisod that which, even though you learn it from Shabbos, but it applies to every single mitzvah, that a mitzvah cannot be associated with Pikuach Nefesh, with Sekonos Nefoshes. And the Alter Rebbe brings it in Shin Chav Ches, in Se'iv Beis, in a very strong words. I'm going to just read one line. The V'chai bohem kilomer she'chai vade basiyas ha-mitzvahs v'lo sh'yovel al yidei kach l'dei sofik sakona. And this is something which the mocker of this is in Gemara Yuma, and it starts with the Mishnah in Pegimel, but specifically in Pehei Omud Beis, the Gemara talks about what does it mean, Sofik, Sakonos Nefoshes, and Pikuach Nefesh, and so on and so forth. And Rashi says, Dibra Maschil de Shmuel Leis Lepircha. Rashi says very strong words, which is echoed by some Rishonim, like the Ran. Asher Yaseh Odom HaMitzvahs Sheyichi Bohem Vadai V'lo Sheyove B'Asiyosu L'Dei Sofik Misa. In other words, there's a certain t'nai in mitzvahs, that a mitzvah cannot be associated with a concept of Sofik Nefoshes, even a Svek. And I won't go into the question that people ask, what about somebody wrote a letter, what about Chassidim being Moshe Nefesh in Russia and the times of Shmad? We know that Shmad is a whole different sugya, because Shmad is associated, just like there's certain mitzvahs, we say Yehoreg V'lo Yaver. So the times of Shmad are connected with those times. But I just want to point out to what extent the Rishonim, they extrapolated on that particular concept. I saw in Shuvas Van Hoggeis, he brings over here Leket Yosher with Talmud of Trumas Hadesh, and he says that he goes to the extent to say that any time that there is any Sofik Nefoshes associated with the mitzvah, it's a gnai for the mitzvah. And he brings from his Rebbe the Trumas Hadeshen, and he gives two examples. One example, he says that if somebody is staying with a goy, that even though we know that Minig Yisrael, Mahadrim and Mahadrim to light many candles, we should only light the minimal amount of candles, because even if there's a slight possibility of anything going wrong, of a fire starting, it becomes a gnai to the mitzvah. And he's not talking over here about Ava and the fact that the goy may retaliate. He's talking about Poshet, the Chil Hashem, that the mitzvah itself, the Eibishter doesn't want this mitzvah. If the mitzvah is associated with Sakonos Nefoshes, even though under other circumstances it may be different. Another example he gives when eating moroi with charesis, that even though during the year we're allowed to do it, and the chance to die from it or to be nizik from it, it's very remote. But Dafka Pesach, when it's associated with the mitzvah, it's something which becomes a gnai if we put ourselves even in such a remote level of sakon. So I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I mentioned to him a particular thought, and he actually recently published it in one of his shuvas that he wrote about the subject. And it's a stira in the Alter Rebbe, which is also really a stira from between Mogen Avram, because the Alter Rebbe took this halacha from Mogen Avram. In Shin Zayin and Shin Lamed. In Shin Zayin, the Alter Rebbe says, again, it's a Mogen Avram who quotes the Maggid Mishnah, that you can't kill a spider on Shabbos. If you have a spider that you see crawling, you can't kill, even though, says the Mogen Avram brings the Maggid Mishnah, that it's possible that a spider will fall into your plate and you may eat it, but because it's only echad me'elef, it's only 1 in 1,000 could happen, the spider has to be able to calm. I mean, usually very few spiders are actually deadly. But if a spider you see a spider, to think that a spider may climb up the wall and go to the ceiling, and then it's going to fall in your soup, and you will see it, and you'll swallow it, and you will die. There's so many maybes that the Mogen Avrom, the Alter Rebbe Paskin, that it's not enough to be able to be over on Isser Lav and to kill the spider. At the same time, in Shin Lamed, the Alter Rebbe quotes the Mogen Avrom and says that for Yoldis, for Michal Shabbat. It's true that the only difference between the Yoldis and other Isurim, that for Yoldis you would do a Shinui, and the poskim bringing the reason for the shinui is because it's something which is dover TV. It's something that happens to everybody. Therefore, over there you should try if you can. Obviously, if you can't, you do it without a shinui. But if you can, you do it with a shinui, which is not the case with other activities that you will do to save lives. But then the question is, the question which, I apologize, just one second. So,
Rabbi Ulman, we can't hear you right now.
That's why. You try again.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Okay.
The difference between those two cases is quite simple, in my opinion. That's why it doesn't openly explain the stira. But the answer is that when it comes to a woman, every woman might go through childbirth. And therefore, it's not a result of an accident, but statistically, 1 in every 1,000, every 2,000 or more women will die if you will not prevent it. And therefore, because we're talking about a situation of a dover TV, precisely because of that, we say it's different to a question of a spider. It is also obviously different to the question of driving a car, because driving a car is something that a person could drive very carefully, and he can try to prevent accidents by being extra careful. And therefore, we don't stop life because once in a while somebody may be reckless or somebody else may be reckless, and therefore a person may die. However, when it comes to a question of something that happens to everybody, or a certain kind of a danger that Hashem brings into the world, then it's a completely different approach to it. And we have to be able to act accordingly, especially when it comes to the question of mitzvahs. I want to say also that when it came to the question of Magefa, and I was asked by a few people this question that, in Australia, for example, only in the whole of Australia, only 102 people died. So do we say that over here it's not a Magefa? So there are two answers to it. One answer is in the Tshuvas called Divrei Malkiel. where he explains that when the Gemara talks about 3 out of 500 or 6 out of 1,000, it talks about when suddenly you see people dying for no reason. And that's normal to die in a city of 500 people. Suddenly one day, 3 people die. It's something which could be, or 2 people die, something which could be very normal. When it comes to a particular sickness that we know exists, then you look at it differently. You don't judge by the amount of people that die, you look at the sickness itself. That's one answer. And another answer, I think, which is quite poshut, that when we're talking about a city in olden times, they spoke about each particular place in isolation. When we speak in the modern times, you have to look at the world in a global sense because the world is open. People came from one country to another, and we know that the sickness exists in a particular country. The fact that it could be that right now in one country, a lot of people died, and in another country, very few people died, it's because in one particular place, they started too late, and they didn't prevent it, and they didn't try to stop any meetings and any kind of activities that could spread the disease. Other places, they made certain preventions. But when you know that a Magefa exists, you don't look at it anymore by the amount of people that died in this particular city, but you look at it from a global sense. It doesn't mean that you would not differentiate. Obviously, in every place, you would act according to each place. It doesn't mean that you have to act in every city in exactly the same manner. But from the actual perspective of the attitudes, whether we perceive that there is a Magefa, there's no question about it, that you look at it from a global sense. I want to be able, before I go to a specific question of closing shuls, closing Chabad houses, opening Chabad houses, I wanted just to talk about question of numbers. We spoke over here about that even 1 out of 1,000 by Yoldus, something which is Dover TV, is considered to be enough of a reason why you choshesh for the sakona. There was a very controversial polemic and an argument took place about 180 years ago in Vienna, in Wien. There was a certain sickness, a contagious sickness, and one of the Talmidei Chasam Sofer, his name was Rav Eliezer Horowitz. He wrote a tshuva in his sefer called Yad Eliezer. I think it's in Simon Nun Hey. And he printed a very controversial tshuva from the Chasam Sofer, which still people debated. And he quoted the Chasam Sofer. He actually printed the tshuva. He wasn't just quoting. He actually printed a tshuva, which was printed only in this particular book. It wasn't printed in tshuva's Chasam Sofer. And the tshuva says that in the times of that you allowed to do a mitzitza with a sfoig, by squeezing it with gauze. It began a very, very big polemic. And till today, people argue, that the Chasam Sofer only, most people say that the Chasam Sofer meant only for the Hiror Shah, only for times of Magefa. And that is why it's not printed in his regular tshuvas for that reason, because his children printed his tshuvas. But at the time, there was a very big argument about it. And there was one of his colleagues called Ein Abdolach. He accused the Yad Eliezer that he forged the tshuva, which was a very big accusation. And then you had another Pesach called Binyan Tzion, Rabbi Yankiv Ettlinger, who wrote in the tshuva that on one hand, we can't stop mitzitza. It's a minhag aviseinu for thousands of years. But at the same time, he says that any male that has any chashash of a sickness, and he wrote, even if 1 in 20,000 would die, he has to give to somebody else the mitzvah. He can't do it himself. So you see that the attitude is that when it comes to something that everybody does, a mitzvah of bris milah, every child will undergo this mitzvah. Even 1 in 20,000, he says you shouldn't do the mitzvah yourself. If you have any symptoms, says if you have cold, if you have any kind of signs of any kind of a sickness, give it to somebody else. And again, we know that ultimately, when it comes to every situation, the Rabbonim together with doctors judge what is the level of sakana. So this time, nobody prevented a bris from going ahead. We made other types of, there was a time and that we did tell Moelim not to do mitzvah b'peh. And even with the shoferes, even with the tube, when it took, when it involved taking off the mask in the worst of times. But again, it all lefi hatnai. In other words, there was a time when the poskim and the yonim of certain countries, they stopped bris milah altogether. There's a very interesting tshuva in Degel Machane Ephraim, who was not the Ashkenazi one, there was Fardish Degel Machane Ephraim, who was the son of Beis Dina Shel Shlomo. He was a Rav Roshi and a Dayan in Chalab, in Syria. And at that time, there was a cholera, a very, very dangerous sickness in those days that was deadly. And they paskened that nobody can leave the house and nobody can enter anybody else's house. So he writes in the tshuva, there was one particular case that the moel knew that a particular family had a baby boy, and he came knocking on the 8th day, and the father refused to let him in. He says that Rabbonim said that we can't go in and out, we can't let anybody in, and he complained to the Bezdin. And the Bezdin, and he writes a long tshuva to explain himself, but he justified in this particular situation, they even justified not doing a bris milah at the time because of sakonos nefoshes. And we see that ultimately that is the priority. We see that Shabbos was put aside, Yom Kippur was put aside, the Surikoros, bris milah for smallest reasons. Anytime there's a bit of yellowness, we put away a milah bismana. So the underlying yesod over here is that when it comes to a mitzvah, we are more zoyer in sakonos nefoshes than even in every other aspect of life. For example, people say, why parnosa? There is a yesod to that. When it comes to parnosa, people ultimately go to work because they have to make a living. But in that particular situation, even though yeshivas and bata knesiyos and bata midrashos is considered to be such a fundamental hashpor to the whole world, nevertheless, at that time we have to cease minyonim if that will cause any level of danger. I just heard today that Rav Gershon Edelstein, even though the government in Israel allowed for the yeshivas to open, he says, no, Ponovich will not resume at the moment. We have to start later. In Sydney, Australia, we closed shuls before the government closed them because we saw that what's happening in America, we saw that it's the situation potential could be very dangerous. And ultimately, the government, when it comes with a certain type of decisions to open or to close, a lot of times it's nothing to do with life being the priority. For example, our prime minister came out and he said openly, we're going to make certain relaxations. And he said that there will be, it's very possible there will be a certain kind of a reoccurrence and rise of the curve of the sickness. And he even admitted that people will die, maybe more people will die, but he says, listen, we have no choice. We have to start the economy. We have to be able to get back to life. There's also a lot of pressure. People wanting to enjoy life. So they want to open up beaches and pubs. Pub is considered over here to be in a Beruma Shel Olam. So they're opening pubs for 50 people or restaurants. So our attitude was that we don't necessarily, we listen to the government when it comes to Agbolas, but not necessarily will go with the same pace as they will go. So we closed the shuls before they ordered to closing them down. When it came to opening, which they allowed under very limited conditions last Friday, they said you can open with 10 people, 10 mispalalim, plus 2 or 3 people who lead the services. We gave it 2 extra weeks, 14 days. Why? Because when it comes to inyonim of health, part of Shulchan Aruch is speaking to a doctor. And you can see, you can look it up in Hilchos Yom Kippur, and you can see that the doctor is a very important part of the equation to speak to experts. Ad kedei kach that with Pekuach Nefesh, you don't follow the roiv. Usually in everything in halacha, you follow the yesod of majority. Over here, if you have 2 doctors that will tell you that it's sakana and 10 doctors will tell you that it's not sakana, you follow the 2 doctors. But we have a panel of doctors we discuss both globally and in Australia. And even though in poskim they have different opinions, how long does it take to be able to realize whether or not there is a sakana as a result of any relaxation? And according to certain poskim, it's longer. It could be 30 days, for example. but that's not something which you carve in stone. It's not something which is Gzeres HaKosov. And therefore, we chose 14 days because that is what most of the experts told us is the indication of the result of any relaxation. Now, one of the reasons for our decision also, when we closed shuls, we also stopped minyanim outside. Again, I'm not paskening here for every single place. That's not my intention. I'm giving you just certain ideas and certain foundations of what motivated us and how we can apply it to general ideas without micromanaging every single city. There is certainly a social aspect to Jewish gatherings, shuls bichlal, and I would say Chabad houses bifrat. We know that when the Jewish people come to daven, it's very, very difficult to keep social distancing. And nature of people who come to daven is to socialize. And it's something that we see. It's not something that is a maybe. We're having a man here in Sydney, and his father-in-law in Melbourne, they opened up shuls for Mincha Ma'ariv, and he went to daven. He walked in and he walked out because he saw that everything they said about keeping social distancing, everything went out of the window. People came together and kilahaya. We're talking to each other like nothing happened. It's especially relevant in a situation where a very major part of the gathering, it's not just for tefillas, but also for socializing. People come for a kiddush afterwards. People come to be able to have kids' activities and so on and so forth. And that is something which escalates the sakona to a certain extent more than in other places. If people come and just sit down and they ogedavent and they left, it's one thing. But if it comes part and parcel with socializing, especially eating, the experts say it's a very big level of sakona. That is something that also has to be taken into account. Here in Australia, the government itself limited at the moment, like I said, to a very small amount of people. And we starting the shuls on Shavuos and Shabbos, 2 days, with a limit of only for those 2 days, with 1 hour with masks and other safety features that both the government and the medical establishment and ourselves have put in. And in Mirza Hashem, if we see that afterwards things are going down to not rising, so to speak, we can start relaxing, starting minyanim during the week, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line, what I want to say is that ultimately, in every single situation, the Rabbonim al Asar, together with doctors, have to make a very, very thought-out decision when to start, if to start. There's certainly no chiyuv. If there's any kind of a chashash, even though we are allowed to start, it doesn't mean that there's no chiyuv, not on the individual and not on the shul to be able to open. And ultimately, one of the questions that I was asked, how do we look at the situation? The people are saying that the closure of life can cause more karbonos than the sickness itself. Look, ultimately, you have to put everything into perspective. But in Yiddishkeit, life ultimately will win, because parnasa you can gain later, but a lost life you cannot. So having said that, I will leave it. I have a lot of questions, but I'll leave it up to moderator whether I should go through the questions that are written already, or go in any particular.
Thank you, Rabbi Ulman. Let's go straight to what's Emin Lepedek for now. I think a lot of shluchim have a lot of questions with regards to this week, because many states and many countries are just starting to open around now. So thank you for giving us the parameters of 2 weeks. For some people, perhaps you guys can hear me, right? Can everybody not hear me? Can you hear me? But people have been open for 2 weeks, and they're already starting to do now phase 1 of their opening of the shul and the guidelines you just described. And so there's various questions everybody has with how to maintain the shul al pi halacha. So let's start with kriya. Let's say this Shabbos is the first kriya, and it's Shavuos, and in Eretz Yisrael, obviously they're going to read Nosei this Shabbos, but outside of Eretz Yisrael, we're reading second day Yom Tov. is there any tashlumen people need to do for Parshas Bamidbar this Shabbos?
Okay. So there is a very big discussion about it in Poskim. And the Gomen Akotza, starting from certain Poskim who say that there's a general chiyuv to mashlim the whole Torah. And you can even mashlim Parshias from previous Sefer and so on and so forth. But ultimately, there is a very convincing argument of the Shari Ephraim. The Shari Ephraim says like this, that in a situation where a tzibur davened together and there was oinus, and they couldn't read the Torah, either because the Balkoira suddenly wasn't there, nobody could read, or because somebody grabbed the Torah and ran away and there was no Kriyas Torah, then there's a question of Tashlumin, and according to most opinions, you only mashlim from that Sefer and only one Parsha. However, in a situation where there was no minyan altogether, the shul was closed. Therefore, the chiyuv of Kriyas Torah wasn't chal on the tzibur because the tzibur didn't daven. When you daven together, there's a chiyuv of Kriyas Torah. And therefore, says the Shari Ephraim, there's no need for tashlumin. And even though we could really rely on Parshas Nosei, we could really be machmir and read also Parshas Bamidbar, but we chose to tell people not to do it. First of all, Shari Ephraim is the bar samcha in Yonah Kriyas Torah, number one. And number two, we're trying to minimize the Bamidbar and Nosei from the longest parshas. And to be able to machmir against Shari Ephraim. By the way, there's another sefer which I have by an American, a Litvish Pesach who lived in America called Rav Tzvi Hirsch Grozensky. He was the first cousin of Reb Chaim Ozer. American Rabbanim didn't have Siyata D'Shmaya to become so well known. He was a Gana Gaonim. He wrote Mikra Kodesh. And he also looks like that Lahalocha he paskins that Meikar Adin, you, in such a case, you only read one parsha, and if you want to be machmir, you can read two if they're in the same sefer. That's what he says. But again, at Meikar Adin, we chose over here to be machmir, not to be mekel, but to machmir, to go Meikar Adin, because over here it's in Yonah Pikuach Nefesh, in Yonah Sakona, we try to minimize the time for Kriya. So only one parsha.
Same because of the minimizing of the Magefa and Tichot Tzibura, along with the general question of the Chal was a Chal of the Isser at all.
And also to Meikar Halacha.
Okay, let's move on more on Shabbos. So let's say somebody's actually going to be able to open up the Shabbos and they want to go through a protocol of entry. And one of them, it says everywhere you're supposed to make sure no one has a fever. Is there a way to do screening, the goy, and is the mutter because the middle of the Nachri to tell the goy to do it for you?
Look, we in Sydney, we're relying on people's honesty. And we have people registering, and we're not asking a goy to come along and to measure temperature. The only way you can do it efficiently is with the electrical machsher, because if you're going to use the mercury one, you're going to get people sick by using it, unless you're going to have enough for everybody. So we chose to rely. I mean, there's a question bichlal of who should come to daven, and the different levels of vulnerability and being compromised, and doctors have lists, of obesity, diabetes, and age. Age is a very major factor, and people misunderstand that it's not just to do with how healthy you are. It's true that if somebody is over a certain age and is also not well, then the danger and his vulnerability increases. But age itself is a factor, which I won't go into now. You can ask any doctor will explain to you, and the question is, to what extent you will ban it, or you will very strongly recommend and talk people out of coming if they are vulnerable. And if in a situation where the Rabbanim chose to very strongly recommend, and a person who has a higher level of vulnerability came to shul, it's better to put him at the back of the shul, not in the front. And I'm a believer that with everything said and done, masks are helpful. That even though people come along with a so-called polemic and saying that you might be able to contaminate the mask, therefore it's yotus chorobev seidoi, but I think that it doesn't take you you don't have to be too smart to understand that ultimately the possibility of having droplets coming to you by being exposed to, and the possibility of contaminating yourself, it's two different worlds. So ultimately, if we're able to use masks, I think it's a very big mila. The question of how to lane the Torah, which is somebody who everybody asks, because the laning the Torah is one of the most dangerous parts of davening. When we lane something at Lahavdil, they found that in America, in Baptist churches, they have a very high level of contamination because they have this choir standing there and they're singing, and the amount of droplets come out of singing and out of constant back and forth is a much, much higher level. For Kriyas HaTorah, there are different ways that you can. I was also asked over here, if I may, moderator, can I just address it now?
Before we go on, I just want to have just the direct answer on this subject. Because let's say your local doctor said you have to screen everybody who comes in. Can you rely on the fact that there's a Megayf and Safak B'Koach Nefesh to allow the goy to do the screening or not?
If that's ultimately you'll be allowed to do it because it's done for goy. I mean, there are other things that we compromise because of security. Even a camera that is running the whole time, to a certain extent, by walking out, you make certain changes in the waves of the camera. So we allow certain things for security. So in this case, if it's a must, if it's done through a goy, I would allow it. Yeah.
Before we move on to Aliyas, which is also really important, that's on the same subject. So let's say you said like high-risk people shouldn't be coming to shul, and the high-risk person comes to shul or wants to come to shul. Do we, as a rabbonim, have an halachic chiyuv to tell them that they're not allowed to come, or if they do come, bar them from coming, or we are just encouraged and it's their own risk?
Look, it's very, very difficult to answer the question because it depends a lot on what's going to happen. I mean, if the person's going to start and start fighting and saying, I'm not going to leave, and you're going to cause a scene and everything else. What we do over here, what I do with my balabatim, for example, I'll speak to them before and I explain to them, asbar is very, very important. A lot of times, I find even talking to shluchim, a shliach that lost somebody in his family is much more sensitive to sakana than sometimes somebody else who didn't. It's natural reaction that when something didn't touch us, we're sometimes a little bit less aware of the problem. Same thing applies to balabatim, applies to everybody, to rabbonim, balabatim equally. In Sydney, we have a problem that we made certain noim for davening, and balabatim are saying, why? Loma nigora, we have people who are 70 want to go to shul, and we have to explain to them. And I believe that if a rabbi or shliach shows leadership, and the chatchili talks to balabatim and explains that they care for them, I'm the first person to encourage you to go to shul. And for me, shul is very important. And in this case, I'm telling you that Hashem would like you to stay home and daven at home. A lot of balabatim would understand that. And that would, where it's coming from. Ultimately, if somebody, in halacha, there is a difference between sakonos hatzibur and sakonos hayochid. If a sakona is for other people, you could argue by extension, a person who's vulnerable, eventually he could become also sakona l'rabim, but that's already a one step further. It's already not direct, it's already more indirect. But in halacha, there's certainly a difference between a person who may come, who himself could be sick, and it could be a sakona l'rabim, and then you have a right to come and to remove him, even with security. If he doesn't understand, there could be sakona l'rabim. Or a person that is saying, look, I believe, my doctor told me it's okay, I want to come and daven, and you feel that you will cause a scene, put him at the back, because there's much less chance to get anything. Even when you're sitting in front and he's wearing a mask, there is sometimes a way where somebody is sitting behind him and constantly davening, there's more of a chance. And I want to say that it's not just a question of a person who's getting sick, that for him it's much more dangerous. It's even a greater possibility for vulnerable people, because we know that when we expose the droplets, our organism can sometimes resist us becoming sick. So it's not going to allow it to penetrate. People who have certain vulnerability, they'll be more susceptible to getting sick in the first place. Once they get sick, it's a much greater sakona. But even getting sick, it's much greater possibility. So for them to sit at the back and to be able to not to call them to a Torah and to be able to avoid any kind of, and ask them to, that should leave first after the end of davening and so on and so forth, not to interact, that should be one of the ways how to handle it.
Understand that clearly you're considering it's a kind of a yachid, but we should use our power of influence as much as possible to convince them to have to come.
Correct.
Basically? Okay, so when it comes to aliyahs, there's basically two ways. One way is that the Al-Qaeda takes all the aliyahs. Other way is you should take aliyahs with social distancing. Which way do you prefer?
So there are three ways, actually. There are 3 ways you can do it. And it depends on the third way probably wouldn't apply to a Chabad house in most cases, but it would apply to a place where you have people who, one way how to do it is if you would have a Balkoira, for example, I'll give you just one example, but you can do it differently. Let's say you have a Kohen getting called up, and a Kohen will learn 3 psukim, and you will learn do 3 psukim, and each person will learn 3 psukim how to learn, and then the last person will learn till the end, or vice versa. The first person learns everything till the end and leaves 3 psukim. So that's, I've suggested it in certain shuls of Anash where people know how to learn, and they liked it because this way each one can get an aliyah and everything else. The other way is, and this way is mamash l'chatchila, there's no question about it. The other way is a way that if you're allowed to be far away. So I would suggest the best way is that a person should come to the Torah, and when he makes the brachas, he doesn't have to hold the Torah. He could either hold it with gloves or with the talis or with not hold it at all. But you look at the Balkari moves away, you make the brachas, you look at it, then you move back. And even though the Chatchila, you should be able to read together with the Balkari, but the Yevet, you don't have to. It's a little bit different to 770 on Simchas Torah when they're standing at the bleachers and each one makes it's a little bit more halachadik than that. You understand?
Well, Simchas Torah, there's at least one person by the Torah.
Right, exactly.
Everybody else is from a distance. Okay.
Exactly. So, but over here, for that reason, it's a bit different. But according to some Svardish poskim, it's very, very big. But the Yevet, it's a shalom bracha levatol. If you don't read together with a some Sefer Torah, like by the Sfardim, when they stand up, you can actually stand 2 meters back and you can see everything. Even by Ashkenazim, you could, if somebody could do it, you could do it. But but certainly by the Yevet, even if you don't see the Sefer Torah and you move away, you can also do it that way. That's also a possibility. And a third way, if the Balkari will take all the aliyahs, the way you do it is like that. If it's on Shabbos, then you only have Shiva Kruim, you don't read them after. Again, about the same Balkari, the same person cannot be oiler for Shvi and for Maftir. So the way you would do it is you would first read you would call up 7 times, and then you would read the Haftarah after Hagbah, and then you would do the brachas, then you would do Kaddish, Chetzi Kaddish afterwards. On Shavuos, it's much easier. On Shavuos, the Balkari can be called up to Maftir also because it's a different Sefer Torah and everything else. So you could get an aliyah also for the second Sefer Torah, or even if it's the same Sefer Torah, but for different, because it's a different part of the Torah altogether, and it's not just a repetition of Shvi. So there could be also a way to get for the same person to get Maftir. Those are the 3 ways how to do it. Which way I prefer, it depends. I would prefer to do it either if it's possible. Again, for Chabad houses, it's probably not possible. But if there are enough people who know how to read 3 psukim, I would do the first way first. Then I would do it the second way, people standing far away. And then I would do it, or you can equally decide, if it's more practical, you can do it the way of, the last way of one person getting all the aliyahs.
And if there's 8 brothers or fathers and sons, I mean, are we chayshish at all to secondas the one after the other?
If it's one family, you can give them aliyahs. If one family davening, there's no, the whole concept of calling them together is ein hora. When you have one family davening together, there's no real ein hora.
So I'm getting a lot of follow-up to your comment before about opening and about 2 weeks and opening up for 2 weeks and what that 2 weeks means. And so let's say a person's in a community where politically, I mean, all the shuls are saying they're being extra stringent, they're not opening even though the government is opening. And a person waited those 2 weeks and is ready to open, but all the shuls are still saying they're not going to open. Do they have to be chayshish to the political environment, or can they stay with the halachic guidelines that 2 weeks is a data-driven decision, and that's it?
I'll tell you the truth. I was asked this question by a number of shluchim, and it's very difficult to give a general answer because a lot depends on the nature of the community. If you have a situation where the consensus of Rabbonim to be able to go on the side of the machmir, on the side of pikuach nefesh, I would say that it's not a good thing for the Bavach Shliach. Generally, again, I'm very, very careful to say that every klal has a yotzum in a klal. So I'm not coming over here to paskin for every single case. I'm not paskin altogether. I'm giving you ideas, and everybody can have their own rov. So I'm not here. I'm only here to share with you some ideas. But generally speaking, and I'm very careful to say generally speaking, I'm open to people who come along and say, but my community is different, it's free for all, nobody knows. So I'm not saying that what I'm saying applies to every case, but generally speaking, if you have any kind of a shituf pa'ula between Rabbonim in a place and a general consensus, let's wait, it's better to wait. It's better not to be seen that we're being more flippant on the side of, not on the side of sakona.
People are asking if we talk about opening as well, and now we're dealing with Shavuos coming up. Some like New York, for example, just opened last week, and it's not 2 weeks yet from when the government has begun to relaxing the opening, and the Seres Adibris is coming, and we will know the mitzvah of the Rebbe that we should bring noshim v'taf. Can an exception be made at least for the kriya Seres Adibris, that we're not opening up shuls, but at least for that kriya that we're going to do it even before the 2 weeks are up?
Again, I'll give you my opinion, and it's my opinion. My opinion is that the context in which the Rebbe made a mitzvah of Seres Adibris. The Rebbe made a mitzvah of a generally for Beroiv Am, that to have Hamoin Am, including children, Boneinu, Arevim Ba'adeinu, and to have Anosh V'tav, to be able to relive Ma'amad Har Sinai, the concept that it's not just reliving it, but it's happening now. And therefore, it's not because that there's certain, like a Kriyas Megillah, that there's a certain kind of a mitzvah that each person should hear it. I was asked by Shluchim, different, can we, take out Sefer Torah outside and people coming in for something else, and we just read the Sefer Torah, read Seres Adibris, even though officially you're not supposed to have shuls, so we can arrange shmuggling, so to speak, people coming in to pick up a blimtzes, and while they're all coming in, we're going to come out outside and read a Seres Adibris. I don't think that's what the Rebbe meant. Inside Halacha, there's no greater chiyuv to read the kriya on Shavuos than on a regular Shabbos. On the contrary, there's certain tzad chomer on a regular Shabbos, because over there is an opinion that says there's an inyan of shleimus of the whole Torah, that to read all the parshas. So there's no greater chiyuv on a Seres Adibris. It's in our blood for the Lubavitchers that we Seres Adibris doch a mitzvah. But I think that number one, it shouldn't go as a steer to any question of sakonis nefashos. A lot of people ask me, can we make it in the backyard? Can we make it, start making a private minyanim for that? I told them, take a chumash and read it from a chumash. There's no, in other words, there is a concept in better times, in good times, to bring everybody possible to shul. But when it comes to Ina Sakonas Tefashos, don't do extra kunzen. If they go, obviously, if you came to conclusion that right now the time has come to open up the shul, but there's also a problem. We try to avoid having kids coming in right now, because kids are extra special. They're running around. It's very hard for them to go from person to person. We're trying to keep the, and that's also the problem with a special feature of Botei Chabad as opposed to many other regular shuls. But Beis Chabad, it's much more than just a shul. There's so much more going on, and so much other activities, around other than davening. So I would say that lefi ha'inyan, I'm not going to say not to do it, but don't think that you have to break all the rules just to have a Seres Adibris.
Well, but some people want to do so. They don't have enough room in their shul for social distancing. It's very small. I actually wanted to show you what I meant here, but my power went off as soon as we started this thing. My power went off. Baruch Hashem, that's why I have this fancy lighting. So people want to go out, let's say, to the park where they have a lot of room to spread out, so they can do kriya with a Seres Adibris. And I want to know, do they have, once they're going to be out there, is it going to be kroi that they don't have to be so machmir on the mechitza or on separate seating? Or is it like they're just making a shul somewhere else?
No, for Kriyas Torah you have to machmir, because it's davar shebekdusha. So it's not like certain other things that Chabad, and I'm not discussing when you should, when you shouldn't, but there is also depends on each individual situation. But even in a situation where usually a shliach will be makel and yonim bechitza, when it comes to other peulas, you cannot be makel in Kriyas Torah on bechitza.
So the Bakira is singing and saying it out loud. The Chazan is singing and saying it out loud, whatever they're doing, which is obviously they're raising their voice like you were talking about before, that spreads droplets. Would they have a heter not to wear a mask because it's severe taste and they can't survive it? Or on the contrary, they dafka have to wear a mask because they are the ultimate droplet spreader?
First of all, you could put the mechitza all the way, you could put the beam all the way in front. When the Rebbe was talking about not to have beam in the front, I was once on a rabbi on a cruise, and there was a makeshift shul, and there was a particular yid with a shtreimel who boycotted the shul. He stood outside and he said that the beam is in the front. The mistake that he's making is the Rebbe was talking about a specific situation where they build the beam like in the Reform shuls, when basically everything is next to our kodesh, everything is up front. When talking about a dover arai, not kavua, but you're talking about a makeshift place out in the park or whatever it is, there's no isser to have to lane from the front. So in this situation, when it comes to Mokum Sakona, the balcony should be all the way in the front, and people should stand quite behind him. There shouldn't be any closest to him, right? Maybe in such a case, you could say that you could read without a mask, because it's very, very unlikely that it'll go back, you understand? Especially people standing far away from him. So that's, I would ask a doctor, and if a doctor says it's fine, I would follow it. I know I find it very difficult to wear masks, and I myself made a takana to our shul, this shul, so we are going to wear masks.
So moving back to Shabbos, there is a couple other questions about Shabbos. One is about using hand sanitizer on your hands, and secondly about wearing a mask. And in the mask gufa, you have to wear the special N95 mask that protects yourself more than a cloth face covering that is really meant about protecting everybody else. And is there any difference with regards to wearing it outside on Shabbos? So hand sanitizer and mask on Shabbos.
Hand sanitizer is allowed. There's two types of hand sanitizer. One of them is the more common one, which is more liquidy one. There's no shilas with that you for sure can use. There's another one which is used a lot in hospitals when it becomes like soap, becomes like foam. You do it and it becomes all foamy. That's better not to use. You should get the liquid one, which is anyway more common. And that's no problem to use on Shabbos at all. When it comes to masks, and we've allowed to use them on Shabbos, and gloves also, it's clear from Shulchan Aruch that at most it says a bal nefesh when it comes to gloves. When it comes to masks, because it became something that we use for sakona, and it became part of our clothing that we use in different places for sakona, then it seems to me that it's allowed. And I just recently saw in a shul from Rosh Hashanah that he also wrote very interesting rayos to allow it, and we from very beginning we allowed it.
Why would it not be mimareach?
You're talking about? Oh, you're going back to now the sanitizer?
Yeah, the sanitizer.
Yeah, it's like a liquidy. I made a distinction. There is a marech in a very foamy one, but in the regular liquidy one, it's not marech. It's mamish. It's almost like liquid. It's like using a liquid soap, for example, or when you use the mouthwash, for example. There's no, you don't make any foam. So there's no. I think it's called English Purell. What is it called?
Yeah, Purell. Yeah.
That's no shilas. You can use it on shilas.
So in last week's class, the doctors were saying that you should suggest how to sanitize restrooms in between users. Have each user sanitize after or before themselves. And how do you sanitize on Shabbos a restroom, a toilet, without doing schita? And can you use diaper wipes? There's like these and like that. When it comes to sanitizing wipes, the whole idea of sanitizing wipes, that you have to make the feach manas latfiach in order to be able to be sanitizing. So is it possible to sanitize with a sanitizing wipe on Shabbos?
The best ones to use, the most kosher ones Shabbos, are the sprays. You can get a spray that you will spray on the surfaces, and that's the most kosher way on Shabbos to do it.
The aerosol spray or the manual squeezing spray that spreads? I mean, both of them spread a lot. You're not worried about spread? About the spritz?
The poskim we spoke about it, about using, for example, in bathrooms, and Reuben Kekulam allow it without any question.
So if my local country doesn't require people to wear masks, they don't suggest people to wear masks, am I required to require people to wear masks?
I think you should speak to a doctor. To me, it's something at the moment. Again, it depends a lot on the general picture in your place. What is the level of if nobody has the sickness, it's highly unlikely, and you keep your social distancing, maybe you can get away with it. But I really believe that ultimately masks they really, really prevent. So in a situation where there is a great amount of danger of spreading it, then I would very much suggest it. I don't know to what extent you can force people and everything else. But again, like I said in the beginning, the whole polemic, people coming along and saying masks are counterproductive and they cause disease. I think you don't have to be a doctor to understand that ultimately that there's much greater benefit to wear them and very unlikely that they're going to cause any harm.
Let me explain the question a little bit more. That now, especially in America, it's become this whole political statement now. Unfortunately, it's become political about wearing masks and not wearing masks, especially here in Texas. The people that are pro-mask, against masks, it's become a whole political issue. And so a lot of people argue that a lot of these systems are really about politics more than it is about health. And so therefore, the reason why they're making you wear a mask because they want to control you. The reason why they're not making you wear a mask because they are too loose, or like, for example, lifting travel restrictions and letting people go into our mikveh which it was until now. The guidance was anybody that traveled from New York 14 days. Now Texas lifted the travel restrictions, and I'm sure it's going to happen in a lot of other states where they're trying to reopen the state. At which point do you know that I can start letting people use the mikveh that traveled from New York without waiting 14 days?
About mikvahs noshim.
Yes.
Okay, mikvahs noshim is something which I don't want to discuss over here at length because I believe if you would use the right protocol, both in the PA of chlorine in the water and the protocol of how you disinfect between every woman, the calls man that somebody doesn't have symptoms, so there's no chashav, they actually have the sickness. I don't believe that there's one lady in the world got sick, and I never heard of even one case that somebody got sick because of mikvah, as long as you will keep the mikvah properly. So it's something I'm happy to discuss privately on what I believe should be the minimal level of keeping mikvahs. And I think that we have to, it's you know, a mikvah, it's very dangerous to close it unless you really think that somebody has the corona and somebody has a symptom. So there is a possibility. When it comes to your question about politics, it's very true that unfortunately religion and medicine and everything else in the world that shouldn't be political once in a while becomes political. And I think it's up to us as community leaders to be able to talk to doctors that are not political, to do our own research, and to be able to advise our kehillas what we believe to be the case, aliba de emes. I won't go into everything. I mean, there's a lot of political things, including Dr. Zelenko's medicine, which I did my own very, very thorough research on that. And I'm happy to share it. But like everything else in the world, things become political, and we have to know how to deal with it. It doesn't mean that we have to change our mind just because politics dictate otherwise.
If someone has determined that the only way they can do a minyan is one day, the first day, so there's a dividend and that's it, because otherwise they can't do it safely, that's the only way they can control it. Can they also do Yizkir on the first day of Yom Tov?
I wouldn't do it because there's a reason why the Chutz La'aretz are misaken to do it on the second day, and I'm very wary of changing matbeas and any kind of takonos that were established. I mean, Yizkir is a post after Chasimus Hashas. It was established already later on, but I, from very beginning when we closed the shuls, I tried to educate my kehillah and by extension anybody else, and I spoke about it in public shurim terabonim and also in print, that there are certain things that there's nothing wrong. Yizkir you can do at home, and there's nothing wrong. It's not davar shebegdushas no kaddish, and the whole reason why the misakin Yizkir is to in order to be able to mask the shabbos privately and to be able to menadev a certain amount of money. That was originally the second part already when people forget about. The thing, the most important part is just to be able to come to shul and to say Yizkar, to be there when the Chazal says Kabbalah Rachamim. But the reality is that I personally wouldn't make gimmicks that can interfere with reasons why the poskim in different ages establish things in a certain way.
So let's say somebody wants to take the Torah outside, they're going outside to the parking lot, and they're going to separate mechitza the way you just said that you're supposed to do. But they weisendach with their Chabad house was come forward and racing all year round. The door is closed. If you're making the igen, they're going to do it in the parking lot. There's the mechitza is very easy to have because everybody's going to provide it themselves on Shabbos with these machines that have wheels. What?
Which parking lot is it?
It's their own. It's their parking lot, but they're going to be outside and they can see what's going on outside. Do they have a problem of dealing with the blatant what's happening in front of their eyes, or can they continue to pretend like it's not happening?
So it's the opening parking lot, people come in the cars and they're standing among the cars and reading the Sefer Torah. That's what you're saying.
I don't know exactly, but yeah, I guess so. That's always the question that was posed to me.
I understand. I talk to many shluchim and I understand different nisyonos of shluchim, and I do, and the our heterium for shluchim to close the eye, milam ayin, and not to tell people not to come to shul even though they're going to drive. There's a very big difference between milam ayin in a situation when you know how they're coming and to be able to provide the service for them. I know it may not be a popular opinion, but I always tell shluchim everywhere that it's wrong to open up parking lots on Shabbos.
If their parking lot is closed, you're okay with them making a minyan outside for the kriya in order to include Sedis.
I wouldn't be comfortable to do it.
What?
People sitting in cars and listening to kriya?
No, they're not sitting in cars. Lemons logging at the parking lot's open. They parked at 4 blocks away, or whatever. We don't know how they're coming. And they're all going outside, and the kriya is going to be outside in order to have as much as possible because there's not enough space in the shul.
Okay, so you're asking a question not about Corona. You're asking a question about the Chlal on Shabbosim. How's it different to make a minyan in the shul? It's a to make a decision to make a minyan outside or inside. It all depends on the current situation. What doctors are saying, in certain places doctors may say it's safer to do it outside, and the rabbi or shliach may decide at the moment he wants to make minyanim outside because of whatever difference.
I'm going to cover the Torah, cover the tzibur. Is it okay to do it outside in the parking lot?
According to Halacha, you're allowed. We rule for people that when they make minyanim outside, you're allowed to take sefer Torah outside, and there's no difference for them at all. And whether they come by car or not has nothing to do with that particular shaila. That's a general shaila about balabatim coming back to shul.
So let me say, Chas v'chalil, Rahman al-Islam, one of the shluchim, which are the bonim in their stet, get a call. Rabbi, my family member is going on a ventilator. Are they required before that family member goes on a ventilator to recite Shema and Vidui?
Look, it's definitely something that anytime going into Makom Sakana. I mean, some people every time they go to a general anesthetic, they do the same thing. They say Shema, and at least a short, there's a short form of Vidui. You can say one line in the Vidui. There are people who do that. There's not, any time that we say Vidui before we go to sleep, and we say Shema before we go to sleep, right? So Lachas Kam when you go to on a ventilator. So I would say that calls man that it's not going to kill them just by telling them that. Sometimes the person says Shema Vidui and he'll die because of that. Like the Gemara says, Pachat kills more people than the sickness. So you have to know who you're talking to. Sometimes you might just make him feel like that's it, finished, and he won't have any power to fight. But ultimately, if a person asks the shaila and he wants to know 100%, Madach, we go to sleep, we say Krishma and Vidui, Alachas Kavakama when you go to Makom Sakon and you go to sleep.
Let me talk about the shliach himself is a mevuger, and himself has serious underlying health conditions or a combination of both. And the shul should open because it's already past 2 weeks and doesn't know what to do. Does he have a moral obligation to open, even though he won't be there? And in his absence, it'll be a churban, kamuvin, and never the Rav is not there, what goes on, or because he has a moral obligation to open and to be present, to make sure that it's okay and to try to keep himself safe.
So first of all, I was asked this question on this list of questions, and the question was a double question. Number one, the shliach himself wrote to me that he was very, very compromised. I mean, he listed a number of things that are wrong, that make him a very, very susceptible target for the disease. Number one. And number two, he said that all these members are over 65 or 70. That's what he wrote over here. In such a case, when most members are elderly people, don't open the shul. I wanted to share with you that when we closed the shuls soon after Purim, I didn't know what I'm going to do. I felt like I had to do it, and we sent a psak to the whole city. And I had to, that Ma'ariv, where people came from Ma'ariv, and I had to tell them, please take it at film, Talson's film, and we're going to close the shul until further notice. And then my wife told me it's something which became a viral, as I say. It became very well, and to me it's a biggest, it's like a Yeshua, so to speak, in these times, how to be able to keep the kehillah together. We started, during the weekday, we started Zoom davening with the kehillah, Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv. Obviously not Shabbos and Yontif. But the fact that we meet 3 times a day with the core people who would otherwise come to shul, it already makes a very big difference. And even some balabatim used to come only on Shabbos and never came during the week. They now come because that's the way. It's very easy. You turn it on, everything else. So I think that's something which is, you can be yotzat tefillah, but tzibur over here, there is definitely an inyan davening together, even berichuk mokum, but at the same time, it talks about it in poskim, but you can't call it, you can't lie to yourself or to others, say it's tefillah, but it's not tefillah, but tzibur. But nevertheless, at least you're not completely abandoning the sheep, and you're not making everybody, and we also include now Limud Torah every day after Shachris Mechamar, we learn something, and so on and so forth. Now, even in a situation when the shliach is compromised, there's no question that he can't put himself sakana. What kind of, if chas v'sholom something will happen to him, he won't be there to look after his kehillah. So just like any other situation when a shliach, if the shul is healthy to open and the shul itself is not a makom sakana, and he feels that it could be very safe and it could keep all the distancing, he can try to find a substitute, but he himself shouldn't go.
He talked about at length about doctors and their impact on doing on the halacha and on the sakana v'chulu, and there's obviously a lot of controversy revolving around Dr. Zelenko and following his advice or not following his advice. Right. Do we take his advice as a serious das in Refuah, or has it gotten so political that we can no longer rely on
Okay.
it as a realistic position.
I can tell you my opinion, and I'm not a doctor, but I talk to Dr. Zlanka personally, but I don't trust people just because I talk to them. I don't take the opinion because obviously he's Nogea Badova, that's his cocktail, that his medicine. I can tell you that I've researched tremendously from all different cities and places of the effect his medicine have, and I believe that you can't deny that the medicine helps in the vast majority of cases. When I'm vast majority, I'm talking about over 95% of people who took it within the beginning of the sickness, they got better. I'm talking about speaking to all cities in all around the world, people tried it. Unfortunately, it came to a point where they became very political and it's very hard to get it. Here in Australia, because they're copying now what the American political establishment is saying, and including the medical establishment, which belongs to political. So over here, if a regular doctor, even if I have a doctor over here in Sydney who is a top diagnostician, a very, very good doctor. And I shared with him and he says, if I would get corona, I would take he asked me to send him the exact, because it's not just the actual medicine, but it's a combination of three, which helps. On its own, it's not going to have the same effect. So I've sent him the whole combination and how to take it. And he told me that unfortunately, if he's going to give me a prescription, I won't be able to get it from a pharmacy, because pharmacists are told not to give it unless you have a prescription from a rheumatism specialist. Only then they will give it to you. It's like
right.
Anyway,
when we talk about asking three reifim, one reif says yes, one reif says no, and a third of machria. Is the Lenko's position a third of machria, or is he not part of the three anymore? Now we have to go with a different three.
I've asked many doctors. I've spoken to many doctors, and I've spoken to many, many people who took it. I talk about not dozens, much more than that. And I came to my own conclusion. I think that if you take it people talking about having long side effects, if you take it for a few years, you can develop certain types of problems with the heart and everything else. We're talking about taking 5 days, right?
Yeah.
I know people who took it for a couple of years because they had certain arthritis on their hand and there was no side effect, and so on and so forth. So take it for 5 days when Tylenol can have the same effect. I think that to come along and to try to prevent people from taking it, I think it's bilti achroi, in my opinion. But again, I'm not here to give you medical advice. You can each one come to your own conclusion. You all have your own doctors and everything else. But I would suggest that when you talk to doctors, make sure they're not tainted by many doctors. Just listen what is being said on the media, and that's how they make up their mind.
Okay, I think there's some follow-up questions here, but I know we're running out of time already. I don't want to take a hold of too much of your time, but I think we covered most of the subjects. One little thing here which keeps getting repeated is somebody does use a spray to disinfect. Can they then wipe up the spray that disinfected? Is that a problem of schita?
Depends. You have to see how much it will be, but possibly could. Have to look exactly. I think that if you spray it the way you're supposed to spray it and you wipe it, it won't be tefech. I want to just do one more question that came up over here, something which I was asked also. There was a question over here if there's machlekes with the shliach and the shlucha of a certain type of a decision to do with matzav, who should win, the shliach or the shlucha, right? So generally speaking, I would say, that you always al pi halacha, you go always on a chumrah to do with pikuach nefesh, to do with sakana, like Rabbi Chaim Brisker said, like many other, like the Tzemach Tzedek spoke about, that we're not being makel on Hilchos Shabbos and other inyonim, but we are being machmer pikuach nefesh. But I was asked a particular shaila from a moel that was asked to go to a particular country to do a bris, and his wife felt uncomfortable with it, and she felt that she was very careful. She doesn't want him to go. And at that particular time, I suggested to him that ultimately you can't just ignore her and go, but how to explain why in this particular case, judging for where he's going and everything else, I felt there was no real sakana. and to try to come to some joint agreement. And he did it, and ultimately she agreed, B'lev Sholem, after he presented it the way I suggested. I don't think they should go rosh berosh and fight, but ultimately, if there is a very, very peaceful discussion, it's possible to be able to come to a conclusion, usually on the side of Zakonos Nefashos.
Just to wrap this up, as a couple of other people which are bringing up about preschools opening, summer camps opening, and when to open, that's really a question for the doctor, if I understood you correctly before. We should be very cautious about opening and follow the doctor's correct directions very carefully. Rabbi Greenberg, please take it away and let's close up. Thank you very much, Rabbi Ulman. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And everybody should just be safe and healthy.
The surfaces, if you spray it and you clean it with a towel, it's impossible to have schita in such a case. I don't believe that there will be enough of a moisture to clean off the surfaces. There will be any schita on the if you use a thick a thick towel, or there's certain towels which bichlal, certain materials there's no schita with them altogether. All right. Finished?
Rabbi Greenberg.
Yes, I just want to say a big thank you to Rabbi Ulman. And I want to just mention one vote that I shared with Rabbi Ulman a few days ago. In a sikha from the Rebbe in Chofov Lamed Aleph. The Rebbe mentions, the Rebbe spoke on all subject there, but one vote from that sikha, the Rebbe says about, the Rebbe tells the story of Shmuel HaNavi. That the Eibishter told Shmuel HaNavi to go and be Meshiach David, to be a king, to be a melech. And Shmuel said to the Eibishter, Veshoma Shaul Varagoni. If Shaul will hear that, he'll kill me. And the Rebbe says, here the Eibishter tells Shmuel HaNavi to make a mitzvah. The Eibishter mitzvah to make David a melech. And Shmuel says, Shoma Shaul Varagoni. So the Rebbe explains, because when Shasmi says Hashem, as a person who does a mitzvah, Le'edaro is only when it's not Shchiach HaZeker. But if it's Shchiach HaZeker or Kvi HaZeker, in such a case, the Rebbe said the word, a mitzvah is nish mamshich hanes. That a mitzvah, that there's no nature of a mitzvah to bring a miracle. A mitzvah is dafke b'derech hateva. So therefore, the Rebbe says, even Shaul, the Rebbe tells Shmuel to make a new king, and because it's as Kvi HaZeker, because Shaul is the king, and if he hears that someone is making another king, he's going to kill him. And the Eibishter agreed with Shmuel, and he gave him a way how to do it in a way the Shaul should not know about it, not kill him. So therefore, it's what Rabbi Ulman, just one mechad, what Rabbi Ulman just said, that it's very, very important for all of us. And if Rabbi Ulman has a moment, maybe to mention the preschools, because people are constantly asking that question, maybe to mention why should preschools, what's the difference in opening a preschool to opening a synagogue? Why by synagogue we make such a limitation, but by preschool we say, well, if the government wants to open up. If Rabbi Ulman could just touch on this one.
Okay. The obvious difference between preschool, there are two differences. One of them is the fact that a shul is used for spiritual purposes, for davening and everything else. And a person could really say, look, right now, the Eibishter wants me to daven at home and not to daven, just like when a person, for example, can come to he's not feeling well and he can't drive to shul on Shabbos. I'm talking about the shliach himself or the frum person. I'm not discussing now about balabatim that we find attend to ma'alam ayin. Person would say, listen, right now the Eibishter wants me to stay at home and not to drive to shul. The same way, it could be sometimes when you're not supposed to go to shul, it's mitzvah b'al de'avera. But when it comes to preschool, there's a lot of other aspects of life you have to take care of. Number one, over here you have a situation where parents, they really want the kids, they can't handle kids being at home as part of life, and there's a difference between getting on with your life and going to work. People ask me, what am I going to work? If you're able to work from home, but if you can't make parnasa and you can go to work safely, you can quicker go to work than to go to shul. The same thing over here. There's another concept over here. Again, it's something which is done in consultation with doctors. According to, there's a lot of polemics, a lot of unknown in this particular situation, but there's no question when it comes to kids themselves, we don't see such a devastation, or even to a smallest degree compared to what as by adults. You don't see en masse kids getting sick and passing the disease. And many, many doctors, even though they will tell you they don't know for sure and nothing is 100%, but ultimately the consensus is at least a statistical consensus that we don't see with a certain Yitzim and Aklal, you don't see children getting sick and children passing on a disease. And therefore, provided that it's done under the instruction of doctors, together with all of the social aspects and the need of parents to get on with their lives and to be able to send the kids to preschool and everything else, that's why it's different to shuls.
The same thing with summer camps?
Summer camps, look, it's potentially some camps are more dangerous, but again, it depends on the city, depends on the consultation with doctors. I'll be much more cautious with summer camps than with preschools, but again, you can't give a closed answer. I was asked over here on the bottom if I'm able to share my detail. I never hid my details, so the moderator could share it, and it's no different to any other time that people can be allowed to find my cell phone details.
Contact details. Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking contact details. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Shikoyach Rabbi Greenberg for that's a very important point when you mentioned before about what is considered to be shcher chazeka. That's what I spoke about in the beginning. How people were talking about the difference between driving a car or about corona. It's a very, very major difference.
Right. Rabbi Ulman, we really appreciate your time, and I'm sure that our shluchim will have follow-up questions. It's okay for them to call you and reach out.
Yeah, and I want to say again that everything I said, it's not, there's always individual cases. I didn't want to be able to come along and to right away people say, listen, my case is different. Obviously, we couldn't cover every single case.
Then we should be able to take a zecher for Shavuos, to already have Mashiach here. We should all be able to have Aseret Dibres and all the good stuff. From Ter Chadoshim Mititei. Yashakayach Rabbi Ulman.
Amen.
Okay.